Welcome into the Saints Insider podcast for Thursday, January 25th, here from our Saints Insider studios in Metairie. I'm Zach Ewing with Matthew Paris, Luke Johnson, Jeff Duncan. Appreciate you all joining us. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. If you're already subscribed, go ahead and give us the thumbs up below this video. Lots to talk about. As Rod Walker, who's not here, reminded us this morning, this is the 2-year anniversary of Sean Payton leaving the Saints. Not sure those 2 years have gone. They certainly haven't gone smoothly. I don't know that anyone said they've gone well.
I think people are getting nostalgic now, for those old days, because the modern era is not going that well. I've noticed that. People reflecting back on those glory years with Peyton and Breeze.
And at the same time, they're ready for it to be completely different. When we reported this week that Ronald Curry was getting an interview for the open offensive coordinator job, and again, we always got to preface this by saying this is through the lens of Twitter, which is not always representative of reality, but like 3/4 of the people who were interacting with that were like, please no, let's just leave this behind, let's go do something new, let's not continue on with the Sean Payton era. Yeah, I think it's in the 2 years that have transpired since, a lot has changed around here, but I think people are looking to just rip the Band-Aid off and go a completely new direction.
Yeah, it's interesting. Twitter's like funhouse reality, but I do think you can kind of glean nuggets
a little bit
from
you can take little bits and pieces.
So speaking of that, we're going to talk a little offensive coordinator search today. Also talk some of the pending free agents and or void contracts that the Saints have and who may be on their way out, what they're going to do about the salary cap situation, and then we will wrap it up with conference championship picks as we head into that on Sunday. Saints Insider is sponsored by Bank Plus. Their banking decisions are actually made here in New Orleans by local bankers who know the community and take the time to know you. From small business to big business, home loans to bank anywhere technology, Bank Plus is here for New Orleans. Learn more at bankplus.net. Offensive coordinator candidates. A couple of new ones this week, Matt. Both from the 49ers. Saints requested interviews from Brian Griese and Clint Kubiak. Also, the Pittsburgh Steelers, I guess, interim offensive coordinator.
He technically didn't have that title. It was their running backs coach, but he called the plays.
Okay, so
they split duties.
And that's Mike Sullivan.
Yes.
And so those three added to the list, and we take a couple off of the list. Shane Waldron hired by the Bears. And then Dan Pitcher elevated to offensive coordinator for the Bengals. So kind of left with this mix. Still lots of choices for the Saints, and maybe still more names to come.
Yeah, I mean, Mickey Loomis said that this was going to be a very long, patient approach. I think you're seeing that by just the types of coordinators interviewed, or potential coordinators interviewed so far. Like Mike Sullivan, I think, is an interesting choice because he doesn't really fall under that Shanahan tree. I'm not saying he'd be a good hire, but he just presents a different system. And so I think getting a look at all these types of different offenses, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, I don't really blame them for taking their time. I think it's a smart approach.
Yeah. Specifically the 49ers guys, Luke, a lot of what you were talking about on last week's podcast, an offense that makes things easy on the quarterback, makes the quarterback look good. We've seen them make Brock Purdy into an MVP candidate. Obviously, they know what they're doing. One thing with the Niners is you'd have to wait till they're done, which right now looks like it could be all the way through the Super Bowl to actually hire one of those guys. But interesting names to add to the list.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I think you've got to be at least checking under that stone and seeing if something is worth it there. Just because, like I've said it over and over again, those guys have a history of success calling plays in the NFL, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get a Mike McDaniel, or you're going to get, a second coming of Kyle Shanahan or Bobby Slowick or something like that. But the guys that have branched out and started calling their own plays have done well with it. So I think you have to look at those guys. It's the same reason you have to look at the McVay guys. There's no guarantee of success, but there's a pretty good track record there. So, I have all the respect in the world for Kyle Shanahan as a coach. I think he's brilliant. I think he's the smartest offensive mind in football right now. So that would be my first choice, as long as everything checks out with Greasy and Kubiak. I would want somebody from that tree and somebody who's going to bring those ideas in to inject some life into the offense.
And, Kubiak's an interesting candidate because his father, Gary, of course, is a longtime head coach, offense coordinator in the league, and has a connection with Dennis Allen through Texas A&M. Both Texas A&M guys. I know there was interest at one point early on in Gary Kubiak coming here to work with Dennis Allen. It didn't work out, but I do think that's interesting. There's got to be some connection there with the father and son and Dennis Allen.
Well, and one other thing about Gary Kubiak, I think he kind of played a big part in revolutionizing the rushing offenses in the NFL, right, under Mike Shanahan. And I think that's something that we've seen these 49ers offenses have a ton of success with is they really know how to run the ball. I think that a lot of that has come from the Kubiak connection with Kyle Shanahan.
Right, before it was Shanahan-McVay, it was Shanahan-Kubiak.
Right.
It was kind of the link that you would put there. And I think Clint's an interesting name, too, because he also has coordinator experience. He was coordinator for a year in Minnesota. And I remember at the time, so I was at a Ravens-Vikings game in Baltimore, and after the press conference, Mike Zimmer was really mad at this one local columnist, and he said, "Any nepotism questions today?" Because I guess one of the columnists there called out their coordinators were Clint Kubiak and Adam Zimmer, so they weren't doing that well at the time. But then I looked at the numbers from that year, and they were above average offense in most areas. I think they were 12th or 14th in points, 12th in passing, 11th in rushing. They were a solid offense, and he brings a lot of those principles. And I think, honestly, working with Kyle Shanahan for a year is probably helpful for him, too. So, yeah, I think that's a really interesting name.
Kind of two younger guys, as are most of the Saints candidates, but still with some experience. I mean, Clint Kubiak at that time must have been early 30s.
Yeah, I mean, he's only 37, 36, something like that.
And look, the Shanahan offense, I've talked to Sean Payton a lot. I mean, he drew a lot of his influence from Shanahan. So I don't think it would be that drastic of a departure if they brought in someone from this 49ers tree to what the Saints are already doing. So for a guy like Derek Carr, for instance, I think some of the same concepts are used in both offenses. So, but the main thing, I think, Luke makes a great point. They've got to fix this running game. I mean, it's broken. They've got to find a better way to run the ball, take some of that pressure off Derek Carr. So I think that's one of the top priorities, whoever they bring in, is to fix that part of the offense.
And, I think their rushing scheme has been a zone scheme, right? And I think we all recognize that they have talent on the offensive line. And I think if they were to go to a more man-blocking rushing scheme, I think they could get a pretty quick fix there. And I think the zone scheme just wasn't working with their personnel.
And that was what was interesting about Sean McVay this year. If you look at the Rams, is for a long time they were those zone running schemes, and he switched it this year to great success. So, no matter who they hire, I think that's maybe one area that they'll look to fix.
Is that a Trevor Penning renaissance?
Oh, I don't know. I think he's got a lot of stuff he needs to work on. But I do think, and I made this point in the roundtable we did a week or two ago, that this is going to be a really, really important offseason for Penning because it's his first time as a pro where he actually gets to work on his technique during the offseason, where he's not dealing with an injury or he's not trying to prepare for a draft. So I think everybody recognizes that technique is the big issue for him. So if he can get some really intensive training and hone in on some of these details that have been lacking for him, I think we could see improvement in the player. I just don't know if I still don't think it's something that you can go into a season just fully counting on him to have the light bulb flick on.
Certainly would help. What about a timeline, Jeff, for hiring the offensive coordinator? We've said, Mickey said he's going to be methodical. He's going to take his time. I think we all agree that's probably the right way to approach this. But when do you think we'll see a name? And it's a search that's going to evolve too, because like the Buccaneers lost their offensive coordinator, Dave Canales, hired by the Panthers this morning. So more teams will join the list of those looking. If Bobby Slowick gets hired somewhere or Ben Johnson, the Texans or Lions could be searching for an offensive coordinator. So it's going to change. The Saints at this point probably have to have at least a priority list of who they want. But how long do you think until they get there?
Yeah, look, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. I think they're taking their time. I think that's smart. Like Matt said, I mean, get the right person. I know there's got to be a little bit of a sense of urgency. You want to get the person in here and get moving in the right direction. If you're going to overhaul this offense, the more time, the better. But there could be some people they want to talk to on these staffs right now that are still alive. You still got 4 teams, and that may delay some of the process as well. Knowing how Loomis operates, I mean, this thing could easily go into February, I think, and it wouldn't surprise me. This is, I think, the most important hire Dennis Allen's ever made. I think it's pretty clear he's got to find the right man. And I tweeted out the other day about this, and I wanted to kind of clarify. But what I meant by I'm saying person's more important than scheme. What I mean by that is I think they're hiring, like we talked about last week, a head coach of the offense. So I think they got to get the right person. The scheme's important, but I think getting the right person for this job on this staff is more important than whatever scheme. I mean, we see it right now in the Final Four, right? You got the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Lions, and the 49ers. I mean, they all run pretty much different stuff, right? I mean, look at what Todd Monken did. Came in to the Ravens. They adapted to the personnel, and they flourished this year. So you can win a lot of different ways. I know the Shanahan-McVay thing's been popular, but I don't think it's imperative at all for them. I think they just need to get the right person. They've got talent.
And remember, the Senior Bowl is also next week, which is basically like a giant job fair.
Yep.
So I'm sure it will at least extend into, if not beyond, next week, so they'll get a chance to talk to some people there.
Yeah. Senior Bowl on a week from Saturday in Mobile. So just sort of a quick reset. The 3 candidates we mentioned that they added to the list this week, these are known candidates. Obviously, there could be others. And like John Gruden, for instance, is not an NFL employee, so I don't think they would have to announce that they interviewed him, right?
Correct.
So that these are just the known candidates. But Greasy, Kubiak, and Sullivan this week, the 3 holdovers who they've already interviewed, Zach Robinson, Ronald Curry, of course, and then Gerard Johnson, the quarterback's coach in Houston. So those are the 6 kind of remaining known candidates. Anything stick out to you guys? It's really a wide open search. Like, I don't even think you could point to anybody as any kind of a favorite. Zach Robinson's gotten 2 interviews, but I think a lot of us are in the dark right now.
Yeah, that's the way they like to keep it. I think you can see the through lines within the candidates. You can see the McVay-Shanahan connections with a lot of them. Most of them are very young, I guess, with the exception of Sullivan. And I mean, Greasy's still, I think he's under 50.
49.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Curry's 44, but I think half are in their 30s still.
Right. Yeah. I think there's some pretty easy to identify trends within there, but as far as like what direction they're leaning or what they really want to accomplish with this, we still don't really know, and I don't think we will until after the decision's made.
Yeah, and it looks like they're not really finding anyone that has been a long-time coordinator. It looks like they're looking for someone that might be ascending. Most of these guys haven't been coordinators before. So I think, they're trying to find someone that could be their next Dennis Allen, if you will. Fans are going to love that, but the guy on the way up.
Dennis Allen's a great defensive coordinator. There's no doubt about that. And
right.
They hired him when he was like 32, I think.
Exactly.
So, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and should have won a Super Bowl with him. I mean, so it worked. That was a good hire, obviously, despite anybody's feelings about him now. Watching the Saints Insider podcast on the SaintsOnNOLA.com YouTube channel. Subscribe to the channel. If you like what you see, we'll be back every week during the offseason and multiple times a week during the season with more shows, and also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Somebody left us a 1-star review last week.
Sorry about that.
I don't know who it was. Yeah.
Was that you, man?
Was that Matt?
Yeah, uh-huh.
If
I was mad I wasn't on the Wednesday show.
Well,
So
what bothers me a little bit is not, you can leave whatever review you want. What bothers me is that there was no comment to go with it. So I want to know what the problem was. It because I was smacking gum? Do we think maybe that was
could have been my legs?
No, it might have been your weird shaped torso.
Well, that's true.
I want to
discuss that.
If you left a 1-star comment, especially
if you like a slee stack.
If you left a 1-star review and you're back listening again, which would be a weird combination, let us know what you think, and Yeah, we'll respond to that. So moving on, the other thing the Saints need to do kind of early in this offseason is figure out their salary cap situation, figure out what they're going to do with some guys who are either pending free agents, Luke, or guys facing void years in their contract who basically, in other words, it's time to get rid of them or decide if it's time to get rid of them. Michael Thomas, Andrus Peat, Zach Baun, Jameis Winston. So they got to make some decisions here.
Yeah, and some of these decisions could end up being very costly, right? Yeah, I think they've kind of don't quote me on this because I haven't seen the details specifically, but I think with Jameis, I think when they reworked his contract, they cleared a window to make him a June 1st cut, even though his contract voids, which would lessen this year's cap hit. Because if they would have kept it as is and he would have become a free agent in the first day of the league year, they would have been carrying I think it was $10.7 million dead cap hit for him. Michael Thomas is a kind of similar thing. When they redid his contract last year, it was with the understanding that he would renegotiate or move on in 2024. And I think the cap hit for him, if he is designated a post-June 1st cut, would be also in the realm of $11 million. And then Andrus Peat, I think, is the biggest one. Obviously, when you're looking at the potential dead cap hit for him, it's 13.6, I think, for Andrus. And if obviously with any of these guys, you can bring them back and then continue to kind of kick the can down the road. I just don't know. I don't know if that's in their plans, and if it's not, we're talking about for three players like $35 million roughly in dead money, which is not exactly anything new for the Saints. I think in the last 3 years they've carried between $35 and $50 million in dead cap money, but it makes it a bigger challenge, obviously, especially when you start looking at their typical way of getting under the cap is restructuring contracts and converting base salary into bonus and spreading that out over the course of the contract. Well, I mean, a lot of the guys that they have that option with this year, I mean, Alvin Kamara's got like a $25 million cap hit next year in 2025. Ryan Ramczyk is up near $30 million. Marshon Lattimore is up near $30 million. Derek Carr is at like, I think, $50 million for 2025, and you already, that's before even considering whether you want to work his contract at all, because if you do, you're tied to him at least through 2025. So there's a lot of different ways this can go this year, where it's a little bit different than years past, where they're just like, yeah, go, restructure, clear enough money for a quarterback. Let's get under 2 straight years. They cleared more than $100 million in cap space. I don't know if it's going to be the same sort of deal this year. I think it might be a little soft reset for him.
Zach Baun's a guy that kind of strikes me as midway through the season, Matt, maybe we can move on from him. Not that he's not a productive player, but he's just kind of a guy. Like, you can replace him. He plays some special teams, linebacker, obviously. But then they found something late in the year with him going on to the defensive line and kind of becoming a pass rusher. Man, it's just a tough decision everywhere you look.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think they found something maybe with the prototype of that type of player, undersized, situational pass rusher. I think you can find those even in free agency, even in the draft. Like, if you let him walk, I wouldn't be opposed to bringing him back, but just tell me what the contract is. If it is a 1-year deal and it's affordable, sure. But also, like, what is the market for Zach Baun? Like, I know Caden Ellis got a nice contract from Atlanta last year, but
but that was when he was playing.
Yes.
He was playing linebacker, and he added the pass rush value to that. If he had like 7 or 8 sacks his last year here, Zach Baun's not going to be in that same conversation. Though I do think it's interesting from Baun's perspective. Like, would he want to return here, and kind of fit in that same situational role where he's playing 12, 15 snaps a game on defense, or would he want to go to a scheme that is really more designed for his skill set, where he could be a outside linebacker in a like a 3-4, and really where his role is to rush the passer, and that is his role. Here he's like a rotational D end, and it's a little bit different than somewhere where it could probably be a more natural fit for his skills.
Right. I don't think team though is signing him to be a starter. He's probably still going to have a rotational role no matter where he goes. But if you can do that in a system better designed for you, I could see it'd be worth leaving if the money was comparable or whatever.
Right. I mean, if you signed a 1-year deal where you get a chance to be in that role and then get a chance to really build on your value and become a free, I think that's always the path I expected him to take after his contract was up here. Just because this has just been a bad fit for him from the beginning, and they finally started to use the one excellent trait that he had coming out of the University of Wisconsin. He had like 12 sacks his last year in college, and he was coming out as that edge rusher 3-4 type of player. The Saints tried to make him an off-ball linebacker, and it didn't work. And then they were finally like, okay, well, do the thing that you're good at. So I don't know. He's a really interesting case.
And I would say, I think the Saints really like Zach Baun. Like, he's one of those guys they like in the locker room. Mm-hmm. He's a great special teams player.
He's a great special teams player.
All the things, like, they probably value him a lot in the role they like. So I think Luke's point, what does Zach Baun want? Because I think the Saints would want him back.
Agreed.
He's, he fits everything they're looking for is in terms of a teammate and all the things you look for. But he may want to, branch out and find a better fit.
How about Michael Thomas? Guy's been an All-Pro, been a Saint his whole career. Jeff, you wrote a column at the end of the year saying Saints should move on.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're going to move on. Contractually, I think it's probably better for them to move on. I don't know how they can continue to invest in him. Even last year, I think he missed the last 7 games with an injury. So, I just think at this point he's going to be 30. He's still a productive, I would consider him to this point be like a role player. He's still a productive role player, but I don't think you can count on him. And then I think some of the off the field stuff, wore thin with management. And I think they're trying to eliminate that from what's going on with the culture, trying to build, especially with the young receivers on this team that the team likes a lot. Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave. I think they want someone leading that room that's not Mike Thomas, I guess is the best way I can put it. But having said that, I thought he was gone last year, and they brought him back.
Yeah.
So, Dennis Allen has to win this year. We all know that. So is Mike Thomas part of that? I'd be surprised if he's back.
They worked really hard to bring him back last year. Like they were in constant communication, and they went out and got a quarterback, and they're like, this is going to be the thing that makes him happy, makes him want to come back, and I just don't. I think that's reached its end. I'm with Jeff on this. I think they've got too much young promise in that room. Too many questions about Mike Thomas' ability to stay on the field. This is 4 straight years now, 4 straight seasons. I just think it's time, and it's probably time for Mike Thomas to let him. I've always thought like the perfect thing for him, if this whole thing didn't work out with the Saints, would be to go to a team like Kansas City. He'd be a great fit there. It'd be a great place for him to revive his career. I just don't think it's here right now. I could be wrong. I was absolutely wrong last year. We all had our Saints release Mike Thomas stories prepped and ready to go, and it didn't work out that way.
And I think the emergence of A.T. Perry toward the end of the year makes it a little easier too. Because, I think they really like A.T. Perry, and he has a lot of the same skill set, this very similar type of receiver than Mike Thomas. So I would think having him on the roster, wanting to give him more opportunity at a cheaper rate, cheap labor. They need cheap labor right now, and that's what A.T. Perry is, in addition to being a kind of intriguing prospect.
Mike Thomas goes to the Chiefs or any other team on the Saints schedule next year. Turn those tweet notifications on. The week
is he back on? Is he back on?
Yeah, he's back. He's back on X.
He's back. Okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
that didn't last long.
Can't do that.
Oh,
I think he blocked me a long time ago.
You guys don't have burner accounts?
Too.
Come on.
Yeah, we're both blocked.
That's all
I
right.
haven't been blocked yet, so
It's a,
I don't know
We'll
what
let
I
you
did.
know.
long.
It's a
I don't know what I did
huge
to get
hole in my
blocked.
life not having Mike Thomas being able to see his timeline.
So as they head to the Senior Bowl and then the Combine, and I mean, they have to start looking at who's out there, who do we like, who can we replace through the draft or free agency, and then also keep their salary cap situation in mind. And Luke, you mentioned it. You're also working on a story about it. Just kind of in layman's terms, what is their salary cap situation this year, and is it worse than it's been in all these other years that they've had to do this?
So it's not worse in terms of the total amount they need to clear just to be compliant with the salary cap. I think the first day of the league year is March 13th. So that means they've got about a month and a half to clear. I think it's $84 million in cap space just to be compliant. So they've been in worse spots than that. The pandemic year is one that comes to mind. It's still something they're kind of dealing with the ripple effects from that, just because of the sheer amount of work they had to do to be compliant. All that said, like I was referencing before, I mean it's getting harder to do it because the cap figures, because of the way they've restructured these contracts over the years, cap figures are really about to get astronomical for a lot of these players already. And we're talking about players who have legitimate concerns about who they are as players right now. Cam Jordan is coming off a 2-sack season. He's got a $17 million cap hit this year. That's obviously not going to be able to stand. But his cap hit for next year is over $20 million. Alvin Kamara, he's got like an $18 million cap hit, but his cap hit for next year is like $25 million. Marshon Lattimore, they don't know if he's going to be around. Ryan Ramczyk is dealing with significant questions about whether he's even going to play football again. $29 million cap hit next year. So when you start, they can clear a lot of the money from those contracts this year, but then the problem for next year is getting even larger. And that's the tricky situation they're finding themselves in. And this is kind of always looked like it was going to be the kind of end game here when they really aggressively managed the salary cap, starting in those years where they had they hit on the big draft class and they have this great team. They won 50 games over 4 years. They're like, let's keep them together. Let's keep them together. This is always it's kind of like a little bit of a runaway problem now, where the numbers start to get really, 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 really big toward the end of the contracts because of the way you've kept pushing money out. And when the players aren't producing at the level that you've kind of expected them to produce, it becomes really challenging and some really tough decisions they're going to have to face this offseason.
Well, that's why I think the Derek Carr decision is so interesting, because he's the one guy in theory you have flexibility with after the season, and now you could rework his contract because you like Derek Carr and want to keep him around. But ideally, as a franchise, you should want that flexibility. He is under contract, even if you had to rework the deal to give him some guaranteed money or whatever that is. But if he plays horribly next year, you would want that out. And that's why I'm kind of curious to see, is this even possible that they can get under and create cap space without touching that contract, whether they do or not? I mean,
it's possible. It's possible, but then you're touching you're touching all the other contracts.
Now, do you think that's worth it to do, to touch all the other contracts and keep Carr alone, or what do you?
I'm glad I don't have to make those decisions.
Right.
Although I would like them to be paid the money to make those decisions, just not actually make them.
Does the new offensive coordinator have a say in that? How do you feel about Derek Carr?
I don't think so. No. This is a Dennis, Mickey, Kai decision. I don't think much like Derek Carr doesn't have a say in who the offensive coordinator is, I don't think the offensive coordinator has a say in how they manage a cap.
I'm talking specifically about Carr, but yeah, point taken.
But I mean, that's the big question that they're facing from a cap management standpoint. And I don't think the new OC is going to have any say in that. Right. I think they've probably already made up their mind on it.
All right. What you all have directly or indirectly sort of hinted at is, at some point, it's almost like the NFL salary cap situation forces you to at least soft reset at some point. You have to. You just can't keep pushing these numbers until they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the Saints are at this point now where they're balancing, as the slide says, cost, age, production. Demario Davis was an all-pro player this year at an advanced age. You just can't expect that to happen. The more likely thing, and I know Mickey Loomis during his press conference said like, oh, age is just a number, and a couple guys can skew that, but statistically speaking, the older you get, the less likely you are to get production out of these guys, and we're seeing that. So is this the year, given Dennis Allen's hot seat status going into next year, all of that, is this the year that they're going to be forced to do that? I mean, that's really what we're asking here.
I mean, I think we could see a little bit of a reset here, but I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be major. I think the team, the bones of the team, are pretty much in place. But I do think there's potential for a couple of these players that have been stars with this team to not be on the team next year. And I think there's going to be probably some blowback for it because of the reality of their financial situation. Where if we were talking about like trades, maybe they don't get very much back for it. Because they're having somebody take on some salary or something like that. I just think that there's the situation just kind of demands some action, and it might not be super savory in the moment, but it's just kind of a fact of the matter for them right now.
Like I could see them, maybe we've talked about this before, moving on from Lattimore, trading, getting something in return. It's probably not going to be what fans think they're going to get. Maybe a second-day pick would be probably ideal if you could get that. But
the Rams got number 77 for Jalen Ramsey last year,
and that's a good example. I was going right to that point. Jalen Ramsey is a terrific player. He's very similar to Marshon Lattimore, but the Rams reset in the secondary with a bunch of young guys, and they did fine. And I think the Saints are actually more talented in their secondary with their youth than the Rams were. This happens all the time around the league, and I know some of these players are stars and very popular and have followings, but it's part of the business of the NFL, and I think the Saints are going to have to do that because they don't have a ton of assets and this would give them a chance maybe to acquire a draft pick maybe or something like that in a deal. So I fully expect some of these big name players that have been part of the core to not be a part of 2024.
And it's I mean, the draft assets I think are something we've got to be considering here because they are probably going to get 3 comp picks this year. Maybe 2 fourths and a fifth, maybe 1 fourth and 2 fifths. But they only own 2 picks of their own in the first 4 rounds of the draft. And they don't have this war chest. And I think this roster is, as much as Mickey says age is just a number, I think it could use some youth, and I think it could use an infusion of cheap labor, like Jeff was saying. So if there's an opportunity to trade one of the pricier players for some picks, maybe you can hit on some guys. I think the Rams reset went really well because they hit on some big time players in the middle rounds of the draft. They crushed day 2 and 3 of the draft. I mean, Puka Nacua was a 5th rounder. Steve Avila was a all rookie guard. I think they got in the 3rd round. Kobe Turner led all rookies in sacks this year. I think they got him in the 3rd or 4th round. Byron Young, they had like 7 sacks this year. They got him in the 3rd or 4th round. So obviously you got to hit on the draft and you got to find impact players. And I think that as much as the Saints draft, like the whole Saints draft class is on the team this year, they didn't get a lot of impact out of those guys. And I think they've got to nail the draft here to really kind of get to where they want to be.
And I know we're going to talk in future episodes about the draft. We're just now getting started. This is a very deep draft. By all accounts, it's going to be one of those drafts where you're going to get quality much deeper than we have in recent years. So good year to have draft assets.
Yeah, Zach, to answer your initial question, I think the Saints are still going to go about business kind of as usual in the sense of pushing contracts out and kicking the can down the road. They're just going to kick it slightly different in terms of maybe you get rid of a Lattimore or Thomas. Like some of these big names could be gone, but I think you're going to see a lot of familiar restructures in terms of Ramczyk or whatever, or even Cam Jordan again. It seems like they do that every year. Maybe not those players exactly, but I think when, Luke, you asked Loomis about whether any change is needed, he said, I don't know if change is the right word. So I think they have this philosophy and they're going to stick to that.
Yeah, you look at Lattimore and Thomas specifically, and yes, there were schedule things. I'm not saying these guys aren't good players, but the Saints played their best football with neither of those guys on the field. It's not like it's a death knell to lose somebody like that.
All right. The Saints' pass defense, I think, is the strength of the team, and they held up. Now, I know they got lit up by the Rams, probably the best pass offense they played down the stretch, but I think Dennis Allen is confident that they're going to play good defense as long as he's there with the talent they have. They got to get better up front. I think that's a priority, finding a pass rusher. Or maybe Peyton Turner or Isaiah Foskey develops. We'll see.
Lattimore, to me, is like a curious one, though, because he still is pretty young at 27. He has, 4 Pro Bowls. Like, I think you look at the last 2 years and you're saying, is he now injury prone or are they freak? He lacerated a kidney. Like, when does
right?
Like, that doesn't happen.
You guys haven't done
often.
that?
Yeah, I actually have done that.
Oh,
I fell off some red rocks and fell on my friend and injured his back and lacerated my kidney when I was like 12. It was very painful.
How many games did you miss?
I wasn't supposed to be season ending, but I ended
hit the
up being
6th grade IR.
season-ending.
Yeah.
But it's a good point, though. I mean, Lattimore's got a lot of good football in front of him.
If I were the Saints, I'd be asking, could he return to form, or is it worth getting the 2nd-round pick? And that's kind of the dilemma. Sorry to cut you off.
But
No, you're absolutely right, though. It's like, I think when I posed that in the roundtable, I think I said I'd keep him unless unless you get just blown away by the pick, which none of us are expecting because he's pricey and he's coming off 2 down seasons because of injury. I'd lean toward keeping him. He's a really good player when he's on the field, and I don't think that you can look at the 2 injuries and say he's injury prone per se. Now the same thing happened. I mean, Michael Thomas I think missed 1 game in his first 4 seasons. And then all of a sudden, he can't stay on the field. I mean, sometimes that happens with players, but I don't necessarily think that's the case with Lattimore. And, the guy's played with a cast on his hand in games at corner. It's not, it's tough to do, tough to play that position with a club on your hand. So, I don't think it's a matter of toughness for him, but I do wonder just like what a trade market might even look like for him.
Yeah, on the flip side, you need to trade guys when they still have value. And
Sure.
he still has value. If he gets hurt again next year and he gets a year older, that value goes down. So that's why they get paid the big bucks is to make these decisions. So watching the Saints Insider podcast for Thursday, January 25th. We'll be back next week with a new episode. I want to wrap this one up with some NFC, AFC Conference Championship predictions. I asked Rod Walker for his since he's on Pelicans duty today, but he picked the 2 favorites, 49ers to beat the Lions, Ravens to beat the Chiefs. And then we get a rematch of that Christmas Day game for the Super Bowl. That's how I feel too, guys. Matt, I'll let you start. I just think those teams, I know it's easy to pick the favorites, but I think for the 2 best teams in the NFL, and we'll see that on Sunday.
Yeah, we were talking before the show, and I said that I might pick the Lions, but I think you guys talked me out of it.
Stick with it.
I'll stick with. All right,
we shouldn't have talked reason into you.
I'll stick with it in the sense that I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is playing some of his best football right now, and he's such a go-to weapon. I've been really impressed with this Lions rushing attack. I think that's really fuels their offense. And Aiden Hutchinson, just from a football standpoint, I hope he goes against Trent Williams a lot. I know they move him around, but that'll be a hell of a matchup to see. And I just think the Lions are playing really well right now. 49ers were so-so against the Packers, so that's the reason I would pick the upset. But I could see the 49ers easily winning. I think when you asked me a few weeks ago of who I liked in the Super Bowl, I think I went chalk with the Ravens and the 49ers. So I'll flip-flop all over the place. I don't care.
It is a good point. The Lions have that kind of team of destiny feel.
Yeah.
Like they feel like they have as much momentum as a team can have right now.
Right. And Ben Johnson, hot coordinator candidate for Washington. All right.
Mark it off on your
there we
bingo
go.
card.
I just did that to get one in before the end
Over
of the
under.
show.
I thought we were going to get through an episode.
All right, how about the AFC game, Matt?
I think the Ravens, never discount Patrick Mahomes, but just, the way that the Ravens are playing right now, their defense is incredible. I think it's the best in football. And they're also, I think Ray Lewis and Ed Reed are going to be at the game, and they bring back all these legends. You can't lose in a game like that. That would be
interesting.
let down.
Pat Mahomes was on the Manning cast on Monday Night Football earlier this year. I can't remember what game it was, but they asked him the stadiums that he had the hardest time dealing with, and he mentioned Seattle and Baltimore were the only two. He didn't mention New Orleans. Now, he's only played New Orleans once for a regular season game, I think, but he and that might have been in 2020, come to think of it. So he maybe doesn't have the Superdome experience, but he mentioned Seattle and Baltimore as the two places where he had to go to silent counts, and it really affected the way that he calls plays and those sorts of things. So just to be the counterpoint to your Lions, like I think the Lions kind of have a shamrock in their pocket a little bit. I mean, they've been outplayed in the box score by both the Rams and Bucs, found ways to win. And yes, some of that can be momentum and can carry forth and everything, but I just think it's time for that coach to turn back into a pumpkin. They go on the road.
One quick counterpoint to that.
Counter.
Yeah, Kyle Shanahan's game management is going to cost him in one of these games, and we've seen it happen in the Super Bowl. We saw it in the Falcons Super Bowl, where he was calling a lot of those plays. But I feel like he's got to get over that big game hurdle. I know he's made the Super Bowl, but
speaking of game management, though, can we talk about Todd Bowles not calling his timeout at the end of that game? I understand we're talking about going from a 0% chance to a 2% chance to win that game or something. But then on the other side, Dan Campbell is having Jared Goff kneel down with 17 seconds left on the play clock.
No.
The Bucs could have left themselves a good, and yeah, the Lions maybe kick a field goal, but it would have been a long field goal. The Bucs could have left themselves 35 seconds at the end of that game.
Yes.
And anybody that saw the Minneapolis Miracle knows you always have a chance.
Yeah.
Right.
Or Bills Chiefs won.
That's right. What was it, 13 seconds?
13 seconds.
So, yeah, just crazy to me that you would wave the white flag at that point as Todd Bowles, and that Dan Campbell would not realize that there was the potential to open the door back for the Bucs. So, anyway, Lions win. Luke, who you got? Lions 49ers.
I've got Niners. The Lions have the feel. I feel like we see this every year or two in the NFL, where a team that has never been there before gets there, and they're a really good story, and then you think the door's blown off them in the championship game. The 49ers team is so freaking talented, man. And like I said earlier in the show, I think Kyle Shanahan's an offensive genius. I think they got enough defensively to get through this. So I think they're a pretty comfortable pick for me on the NFC side. It's the AFC side I'm having a lot of trouble with, because I was so ready to just count out the Chiefs and think they were, kind of done this year's version of them. They just don't have enough weapons offensively, and their defense is really good, but their offense is just not like this typical version that we see. And then Patrick Mahomes just did Patrick Mahomes things against the Bills team that have been playing very well. And they've obviously been here. I mean, he's played in the championship game every year of his career. Every year he's been a starter.
Yeah.
So I think they find a way to get back, man. I don't know how. That Ravens defense is so good. I mean, they had C.J. Stroud playing with his hair on fire the entire game last week. But I think I've learned my lesson. I'm going to stop picking against them. And I think that they find a way to get it done on the road and be Super Bowl. I can't remember which Super Bowl it was. Super Bowl from 2019 rematch.
Yeah.
It's
the one in Miami.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly Mahomes has kind of become the new Tom Brady. You just don't pick against him in the playoffs. Do so at your own peril anyway.
Yeah. I thought the Bills were going to beat him last week, and
well, if they kick a field goal, maybe they do.
Wide right, baby.
Yeah, make the field goal. So, no, I think if Deebo Samuel plays, and I think he will, I just think he's going to play. They're playing a little cat and mouse with the Lions right now. I think the Niners are going to truck the Lions. I think what Luke said is exactly right. It kind of reminds me of the storyline is very similar to the 2006 Saints, where no one expected them. There's great storyline reviving a city. Dan Campbell's got, people throwing parades toward him in Detroit, and then the Saints had this great story. They got to the championship game against the Bears and got blown out. And I think that's what's going to happen here. The way that the 49ers attack the Lions, I think, is going to cause them lots of problems in the secondary. They're not very good there. We saw that firsthand here. I know they're playing better, but I think that game could get lopsided. I think the Niners got their kind of scare out of the way. So I think they move on pretty easily. And I think the Ravens might win fairly easily. I'm not on the Mahomes bandwagon. He's just because he's made 6 straight championship games. I can't get that game.
6 straight
Can't get that
That's
game
almost as bad as
against
your candy takes.
the Raiders out of my mind. I can't get that Raiders home loss on, was it Christmas Day?
Christmas Day.
I mean, they just looked terrible in that game. They got dominated by the Raiders.
They're doing the Spurs thing where they just like coast in the regular season and turn it on in the
could be.
playoffs.
It's
But
interesting.
this defense the Ravens have is legit, man. Look how they gave up what a punt return for a touchdown against, and that was it. I mean, it wasn't the defense, obviously. I mean, C.J. Stroud and that offense, Bobby Slowick's the hottest name in coaching ranks, and they couldn't do anything against them.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that Christmas game against the Raiders because I was reading somewhere that after that game, the Chiefs had your stereotypical players only meeting or captain's meeting or whatever it was. And they decided that what they wanted to do as an offense was play faster. And they actually have. They've snapped the ball with an average of like 5 more seconds on the play clock than they were before that game. So that is a change. But if you look at it, after that, they played the Bengals, who had a terrible defense down the stretch, lots of injuries, couldn't stop anybody. Chargers was the last week of the regular season. None of the starters played. Dolphins had a banged-up defense. That game was weird. It was in the super frigid cold. And then last week against Buffalo, another team that's had some injuries on defense, that's probably the most impressive of the bunch. But I still say this is a step up now that you're facing Baltimore. So
Well, they're not going to have A.J. Klein covering Travis Kelce anymore. So
no. I just
You think we'll get to see Taylor Swift, and you think they'll show her at all on the broadcast?
maybe once or twice.
do we want to revisit Duncan's take that this whole thing was staged?
Yeah, I was wrong on that. I think they actually are dating.
Unless they're just waiting till she
I
gets
thought it
all
was
the
all,
airtime during the Super Bowl.
just a marketing
and then
ploy.
it will.
Yeah.
I thought it was a marketing ploy.
I just
If
don't
it
see why
is,
that makes any sense for Taylor Swift.
It's
but
the greatest
Good
marketing
sports
ploy
take,
of all time.
bad life take with Jeff Duncan.
Wrong on that one. It happens I think it happened in 71 too. I was wrong.
I just think what we're going to see is, and I know Luke, you picked the Chiefs, Matt, you picked the Lions. Although you're waffling on it,
Yeah.
we'll hold you to it. Like it's one of those rare years in the NFL where the number 1 seeds are actually the best teams. The parity kind of took a backseat this year, and we're going to see 49ers Ravens.
I mean, for the record, I totally think that's going to happen. I'm just too much of a scaredy cat to pick anything but the Chiefs right now.
I'm glad somebody did though. They have a chance.
They absolutely do have a chance, but like that Ravens defense is terrifying, man.
Yeah.
And their offense, I mean, Lamar Jackson's going to win another MVP. It's
Where'd he go to school?
The Texans
DePaul.
blitzed over 70% of the time in the first half last week, and then all of a sudden the Ravens came out in the second half, and we talk about how halftime adjustments are rare. It was like motion, and it was quicker snaps and quicker drops, and all of a sudden it was a totally different offense, and the Texans were getting burned on the blitz every time. So I could certainly see the Ravens having an answer for just about anything at this point.
I think that might be a low scoring game though.
I do like the
Of the
under in that
two,
game.
I think that'll be the more low scoring game.
All right,
But
so
the
we will
Chiefs got
see.
a good defense. I'm just saying
Yeah,
their defense is legit.
We'll be back Wednesday with another episode. We'll talk more offensive coordinator search, see where that has turned, turn our attention a little bit toward the Senior Bowl, and we'll have a Super Bowl matchup to talk about. So for the Saints Insider crew, Norman Bell, our producer, Matthew Paris, Luke Johnson, and Jeff Duncan, I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching.